Okay, so this is Hello My Lovely by Dread Martha. The summary is Spade Slick has disappeared. Can Hearts Boxcars and Pickle Inspector find him before time runs out? Can they come together to save Slick and the lives of Team Sleuth? Can something more grow between them, or must they set aside love to go on with life in Midnight City? And then I think give any content warnings for this chapter specifically. Like overall, does have implied and referenced drug use, specifically recreational drug use. So if that is a trigger for you, watch out for this chapter. And then this is the chapter 1, Meet Pickle Inspector and Hearts Boxcars have an unexpected meet local library. From what Pickle Inspector could tell, the boy was about 11 years old, approximating from the wear on his Powerpuff Girls backpack, the new shirt he was already outgrowing, and the look of anxious frustration on his face. He was sitting in the downtown library, chewing his lip and sweating over a copy of J.R.R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire, pulling his blonde hair with a blush slowly deepening the tan color of his freckled face. The boy was reading with some difficulty, picking his head up and shaking it vigorously about every sentence or so. It was a display Pickle Inspector could understand. The overwhelmingly grim atmosphere of the book and deliberately harsh prose made it a tough one to get through. He'd always thought that it would be better performed by Jethro Tull, perhaps with a choral accompaniment, but as to how that could be arranged, well, that was a completely different consideration that, if he was honest, sure tried to be. Pickle Inspector didn't know where to start with. After all, being a music lover and a composer were two very different things. Pickle Inspector didn't mean to watch the kid as he sat sweating over the massive book in front of him. It was hard not to notice his frustration with all his head shaking and the dejected sighs he let out whenever he trudged through another paragraph. The detective couldn't say if the boy had come to the library that morning just to torture himself. That much was hard to guess since Pickle Inspector didn't know what kids they were into. What he did know was that any young man who was trying to spend his Saturday morning in Westeros instead of pajamas and cartoons deserved to enjoy the experience. Or at least not be absolutely tormented by it.
Excuse me.
Softly spoken by nature, Pickle Inspector had been asked to speak up more than a few times by his local librarians because of a light murmur. He used his regular speaking voice now, over to the boy's table.
Are you... Do you want to read that?
Everest looked at the tall librarian, a man around his father's age who looked like his body had put through a taffy puller and then slid into a sweater vest. He wore the signature camel brown trench coat of a dangerous stranger. Looked like time could take him with gawky preteen strength. But he didn't think it would come to that. After all, this blonde telephone pole could only be a librarian who'd spotted a kid reading far outside his age. And it wasn't like he'd actually wanted to read it anyway. He sighed and pressed the heel of his hand into his cheek, smearing it up to his face to relieve some of the tension reading caused him.
I mean...
He spoke in a quiet voice, looking from the book back up to the telephone. Hang on, we are we are currently experiencing technical difficulties. We're trying a new mic setup where we are not using the same microphone, but we are in the same. Oh, the spacebar was scrolling while you were trying to read. Talk. Got it. Got it.
This...
You could pick like the shift key so it doesn't scroll.
Yeah, use something that's not used for other things. Chad is saying that you're kind of quiet, Bucky.
Probably. I like the whole time, or when I was specifically not
The whole time.
the whole time. I also turned on a couple of filters to try to stop background noise from stream.
I think you might want to just pull up your gain and Streamlabs a little bit. You're probably fine.
Is my thing thangin'? Wow, wow.
That seems to be thanging.
Now he can hear you. Yeah.
Oh, it's better now because I've moved the microphone up to my mouth. Yeah.
I mean,
He spoke in a quiet voice, looking from the book back up to the telephone pole.
no, not really. I mean, it's good. Everyone tells me it's good, and my cousins watch the show with their dads and they love it, and so Radia. She told me I should read the books because I wanted to find some fantasy stories. I'll keep trying.
Tavros turned dreadfully back to the page he was on, while the tall librarian stepped to the seat across the table from him and touched it with one long, pale hand.
Do you mind if I, well, I think I could recommend something else.
He pulled the seat out the few inches he needed to slip into it and folded his hands on the table.
It doesn't really seem like you're enjoying Mr. Martin's writing.
Tavros pouted and looked at his page number. He'd been on page 5 for an agonizing half hour, and he was only a little closer to page 6. Admitting defeat, he closed the book.
It's gonna get good, right? I mean, that's the whole point. It's gonna get good and everyone loves it, and that's why it's on a TV now.
Oh, it is going to be doubled. It seems like it is picking you up 2 times, even though I... on all this stupid filter. God damn it.
It's really not that bad. It doesn't sound
well,
bad over Discord anyway.
No, it wouldn't sound bad over Discord because... Oh, it is good now?
Maffa's saying it's good. Yeah, no,
Okay,
it's
alright.
fine.
Sorry, it was double just a little bit of time now. It's good. Yeah, as long as Kelso doesn't push to talk while I'm talking, I think we're good.
Yeah.
Sorry, no, you're good. You're good. You were doing it. You're fine. That's the setup we were fixing. Is that Kelso's across the room from me now, so maneuvering, they can't just spin around to their desk to sit next to me. We could bring you in here. Okay, I'm sorry. I guess we should start. It's gonna get good again.
I mean, that part was audible. If you want to read after the
Okay.
quote.
He stared at the cover, which showed only a gray family crest on a gray field. The winged serpent, maybe a dragon, on the crest was the closest thing to interesting about the cover, and it still only impressed Tavros with how bleak the world of Westeros was.
Plenty of people like it, sure.
The librarian nodded, his wavy hair bobbing lightly over his tall, bare forehead.
But that doesn't mean you have to like it. What kind of book did you want?
Something like with magic and knights and fairies and strong female characters and magic, plant biologies and swords. Really, really big swords.
Tavros got on a roll and his voice steadily rose. The librarian held a finger up to his lips.
Oh, shh. Remember, library.
Right. Sorry.
Tavros quieted down again.
I just really want something that's fantasy and that's, fun.
Fantasy that feels like a...
The librarian touched his brainy forehead and twiddled his pale fingers through the air.
Fantasy?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
The librarian sat back and thought for a moment, drumming his delicate fingers on the table, then sat up and nodded.
How big a sword are you thinking?
Hart's boxcars was definitely reading the paper, and not at all interested in his phone or the whereabouts of his would-be date. He was just calmly, relaxedly reading the news and savoring the information, not on edge for any sudden ping from the new dating app that had landed him here, in the small cafe in front of his local library, for a Saturday morning date. Nope, not interested in the phone at all, totally engrossed by today's issue of the Midnight City Tribune. There was a whole article about the new gang that had been butting heads with the Crew and the Felt respectively, all about the new territory dispute that had ripped the Felt's end of town in two. Such interesting, vital information. Impossible to miss. So crucial to stay informed and not sit staring at his phone waiting for a message from his no-show date. It felt mighty square going on that date at 9 in the morning to a library. But it couldn't be helped. Hart's worked nights and he wanted to be upfront about dating and being a father. He didn't expect this guy to get chummy with Tavros right away, but hell, it'd be nice. A quick hello to introduce Tavros to his father's new boyfriend after their date, and that was all he was hoping for. After all, Hearts and Tavros were a package deal. A few nights of texting back and forth over the newfangled dating app, Hearts and his new buddy agreed to meet this morning for breakfast. Or at least, that had been the plan. Right now, his date was half an hour late and counting, with no explanation coming in over the app to say, "Hey, Hearts, I'm running late. Sorry, fella." Overhead, the cafe speakers were playing The Police. The barista behind the bar brought the espresso machine hissing to life, but the cafe was still quiet enough for Hearts to make out the song. Now no one's knocked upon my door for 1,000 years or more, all made up and nowhere to go. Welcome to this one-man show. Hearts couldn't argue with that. For all that he didn't see why Droog was such a big fan of Sting, he had to concede that he'd gotten dressed up just to sit here with his lukewarm coffee. Nothing too fancy, this was only a first date after all, but he had traded his usual black on black for a burgundy shirt and a suit that was closer to charcoal. He thought he looked pretty sharp, but that didn't matter now. If he was honest with himself, Hearts knew the date was a bust. About half an hour earlier, he spotted a guy who looked similar enough to his new buddy's picture wandering into the cafe. The guy looked around, glancing between his phone and the cafe tables, and for a moment he looked at Hearts. The length of the cafe was between them, but Hearts could make him out well enough to recognize his face, even if the blonde hair from his picture was a whole lot more brown in person. The guy took Hearts in, glanced at his phone like he'd just gotten a call, and ducked back out. The door to the cafe chimed closed behind him, and Hearts was left to sit with his newspaper and coffee and wonder. It could be any number of things. After all, he was a notorious leg breaker, wall buster, and safe smasher for a criminal syndicate. He was also a father, a musician, and a catch as far as he was concerned. It could be his size, though the little blonde had sounded excited about that. Whatever it was, it only marked what Hearts already knew. The dating app was a bust. Meeting people in the flesh was just more natural, and in Midnight City it paid to be upfront with a partner. Maybe the app was good for finding a convenient arrangement, but Hearts had no use for that. He wanted someone who could share in his hectic life. Being upfront about that required more than overcomposed digital conversations. Overhead, Sting was squealing, "I feel so lonely." I'm not going to read every single iteration of So Lonely because there's 12 of them. Hearts couldn't argue with that either. Instead of fighting the feeling, he sighed and played the sapple a little while longer. On the very slim chance he'd misread this whole morning, maybe his date would come bounding through the doors in another second. Platinum blonde and perky like he'd been on the app. At the very least, sitting around would give Tavros plenty of time to find a good book in the library, so the morning wasn't a complete loss. Hearts finally set down his newspaper over his silent black phone. For the first time all morning, he took a real look at the headlines. Bocce Boys seize low town following firefight. The Bocce Boys were the latest pains in the Crew's collective ass, new toughs who were well-manned and desperate to make a name for themselves. Their leader, Jack Polino, had his picture on the front of the Tribune, the rest of the gang standing behind him in dull focus. He was an incredibly round, stout man. Round, bald head, round, wide shoulders, round belly overshadowing a pair of short, bowed legs. The other Bocce Boys matched him in shape, if not size. They flanked him in the photo, more than twice his height, making them a gang of orbular bruisers. The picture was in black and white, turning the dark green and red suits the Bocces wore a uniform dark gray, while Polino stood out against them, head to toe in crisp white. As much of a pain as the bocces were for the crew, the paper said that they were an even deeper nuisance to the Felt. Cold comfort, all things considered. The Felt's territory shrinking only meant the green idiots were more ornery and keen to make problems for everyone else, and a new gang cutting themselves a slice of the city would only ever get hungrier and hungrier for more. Hartz frowned and flipped through the rest of the paper in search of good news. There wasn't much to be found, just a pretty solid Calvin and Hobbes on the very last page. He wrinkled the paper together in his fist and stared down one last time at his phone. His thumbprint opened to the home screen where no messages of any kind waited for him. Yeah, okay then. He got up from the table, took his empty mug back to the dish tub by the register, and finally walked out of the cafe. Shoving the crumpled newspaper under his arm, Hartz walked up the front steps of the library and inside. Overhead, a skylight let some of the overcast daylight shine into the narrow lobby. A pressboard front desk greeted visitors immediately as they came in, flanked by a row of triplet copy and fax machines and cabinets upon cabinets of card catalogs. Hartz moseyed past all that towards the shelves of the fiction section, scanning the rows for his son. He'd left him at the table Tavros liked best in the whole place. Equidistant from the water fountain, comics, and fantasy sci-fi sections, Tavros's backpack was still hanging on the back of his seat, but his son was gone. There was a brown overcoat hung over the other seat, and a bowler with a blue band sat on the side. "Tavros?" Hart said in more than a whisper, coming around the Formica shelves towards the very back of the library. Here there was a large mural cut in relief from the cement wall holding up the back of the building, shelves growing up around it. At the edge of the mural, two blonde heads bobbled up at one of the high shelves. Hartz recognized Tavros' little peanut head, but not the leggy librarian helping him. Hartz came up as two of them leaned together, scanning the top shelf from opposite directions and convening in on the same book at once. He couldn't place the librarian, but the sweater vest and corduroy slacks didn't lie. It was funny, the guy looked oddly familiar, but Hartz would have remembered meeting a blonde with legs like that.
Here we go.
The librarian reached one long arm with a pale spider for a hand up to a fat book on the top shelf. He pulled it down and handed the book to Tavros.
That's why it's called high fantasy.
Tavros chewed his tongue in a short laugh, looking starry-eyed at the cover. A lone centurion in a striped red cape, as gossamer as a butterfly's wing, stood on a red and purple cliffside. He held a twisted longsword, the length of his whole body, aloft towards a broad figure holding a staff and facing him from a cliff across a chasm that filled with dawn light. Storm clouds rolled in overhead, deep slate blue with the title in red and silver. Brandon Sanderson, The Way of Kings.
Oh man. Pops, look.
Tavros turned to his father and showed him the book, his hands shaking with excitement. Hartz looked at it and wondered if the same guy who painted the overly elegant art salon covers from his own youth was still working. Looks like you found something good, eh? Tavros nodded hard enough to turn his whole face bright red. Hartz looked from his son to the librarian who'd helped him. He was tall and rail-thin, with gangly limbs stuffed into a cable-knit sweater vest that was too big for him, but not long enough. Several inches of a white button-down hung out from under the hem of the sweater over his brown corduroy slacks. These were cuffed a ways above his birdie ankles and mismatched socks. Hartz could swear he recognized the long, gaunt face, but he couldn't pin a name to it. But there was something in the big blue eyes, about the bluest Hartz had ever seen, that was so damn familiar. He could kick himself for not remembering. It was wholly unlike him to forget a pair of long, elegant legs like that, and Hartz smiled, ready to amend that mistake. In Pickle Inspector's line of work, it was inevitable that he would forget someone's name. After all, the world of the detective was, by nature, filled with many people and their multitudes of personal minutiae. That meant everything from faces, names, occupations, likes, dislikes, feuds, loves, allergies, schemes, and screw-ups. He could never anticipate when knowing someone's shoe size would be imperative to solving a case, and when he needed to know exactly how strong someone had to be and to climb 3 stories up a wooden trellis and into a dead man's house through a false window. The amount of information in his head, and really in the heads of all of Team Sleuth, on any given day was preposterous. And thanks to that, coupled with the flashcards he and Sleuth practiced with to keep the cast from their many jobs straight, and a regular subscription to the newspaper, and the simple fact that he lived in a populous, crime-ridden city that supplied more than its share of quandaries for a detective, solvable and unsolvable, well, he could be forgiven for not recalling the name of this strikingly familiar side of beef. The Bombay machine in Pickle Inspector's brain returned to life, one row of wheels turning in sequence to find out how he knew this man, the next row ticking along one letter at a time for a name. All the other rows started spinning towards any fact that he might connect to this handsome stranger. Pickle Inspector tried spitballing the man's measurements to aid his search. He was just a bit shorter than Pickle Inspector, making him roughly 6'2" and somewhere around 300 pounds. It was hard to guess with real certainty given how strong the man looked. Whatever he weighed, Pickle Inspector could tell he was a man built of very sound muscle, which, if he was honest, and he sure tried to be, made it that much harder to look away from him. He wouldn't say he had any particular type, unless being a good listener and a cat person counted, but Pickle Inspector thought the man cut a very fine figure. The fact that this man wore a crisp gray suit that looked brand new, an open button-up of glimmering deep red polyester also registered with him, along with a small puff of black chest hair that peeked out from under one of the buttons. These things all helped cloud Pickle Inspector's search for his name. Now that he thought about it, there was something to the stranger's familiarity and his broad, welcoming body. Pickle Inspector felt his ticking brain narrowing in on the answer, and it was the baseline to the Commodore's 1977 classic brick house. Pickle Inspector pulled himself out of his head enough to address his young friend, letting the wheels in his brain go on turning.
Now, Mr. Sanderson is what you're looking for, but it still might be a little dark.
Tavros might have been listening, but he was mainly making googly eyes at the beautiful illustration on the cover. So instead, Pickle Inspector addressed the boy's father.
I should say there's some murder and a cover-up and that sort of thing, if it bothers you at all.
The father snorted the way any citizen of Midnight City would, a smile showing off prominent laugh lines in his fat cheeks. The long sideburns he wore almost to his round chin stuck out when he smiled, making the expression that much more warm and magnanimous. Almost leonine. Something about the smile threw off Pickle Inspector's ticking brain, the wheels churning back a spell to recalibrate. The smile was new information, or maybe Pickle Inspector was just looking at it too closely. That did tend to happen to him. But, well, he didn't really want to look away, and it was nice, this feeling of an unusual view of a familiar face. I think he'll be fine with that. The father put a big hand on Tavros's head, squashing his blonde hair and ruffling it affectionately. His cousins are neck-deep in Game of Thrones. Is this any worse than those books?
Oh, no, not at all.
Pickle Inspector shook his head, while Tavros looked up and assured his dad.
We already tried Game of Thrones, but we decided it would be way better.
He was clutching the book to his chest, alternating between hugging it and staring at the cover.
It looks so cool. Look how big that guy's sword is, Pop.
It's a much kinder world. Plenty of drama, but not as grim. It's just more...
He paused to find the right word, aware of Tavros's father looking him up and down. It gave him a funny feeling, a pang of his usual anxiety combined with a warmth that could only mean he was blushing. Oh boy, Pickle Inspector knew his pale face reddened so obviously, and thinking about how hard he must be blushing only ever made him blush more. He let out a little huff to keep it together.
More colorful. I think it should be a perfect fit.
There was something else rolling in his gut. His wheels turned together, the key to set the cipher hiding the man's name almost clear. As much as Pickle Inspector liked a mystery, his gut told him this one had an unpleasant wrinkle. Or maybe he was just hungry? Come to think of it, he couldn't remember what he had for breakfast. Now that does sound nice. Tavros' father nodded. He pushed his round chin at the book in his son's hand. So what do I gotta do to get a squiggly sword like that and some red undies to run around in? If anything could fish Pickle Inspector out of his head, it was that image. Tavros shook his head and made a pinched face.
Come on, Pop. It's not even underwear. Look, It's a cape.
Oh man, so I'd have to go commando?
Oh, very Conan the Barbarian.
Pickle Inspector found himself smiling despite the feeling of his blush rising from his neck to his ears.
You, you, you only need an axe and some bikini bottoms.
You get it.
The man snapped his fingers and pointed to Pickle Inspector, a bright smile on his dark face.
You know, Tav, Halloween is right around the corner. Maybe you and me had better get some loincloths, huh?
Pops, don't be silly.
Tavros looks like he was reeling at the idea.
It'd be way too cold for that.
Not if they were, say bearskin, a nice fur lining. That sounds nice and cozy.
Pickle Inspector offered. Tavros gave a short yelp, pawing at his face at the image of his father in a furry loincloth, while Pickle Inspector's mystery man let out a deep, barking laugh. He quieted in a hurry when several of the readers in the other rows of books all turned to the three of them and let out a sharp, powerful shh at once. Pickle Inspector scooted back and waved for the two of them to follow him. Tavros followed, ducking his head and blushing while his father smiled to himself. Pickle Inspector led them along the back wall, stopping at a quiet spot in front of the cement mural. Behind them, shelves and shelves of periodicals stood empty, giving them a little more privacy.
Sorry, didn't want to bother the readers.
He told his new acquaintances.
Nothing sorry about it.
The man told him. He nodded his head back the way they've come.
I'm no fan of a stickler. But besides, I always like this old mural.
The father pushed his chin at the cement relief, smiled at Pickle Inspector, and then back to the mural. It depicted the building of the Midnight City clock tower. Two men, one a broad, muscular worker cut in round, geometric curves, and the other a willowy, brainy architect. The big man wore overalls and carried a rounded square block almost as big as he was on his back. The architect extended a guiding arm, pointing the block where to go and holding a clutch of blueprints behind his back. The famous face of the clock itself loomed behind them as the two men faced each other. Around them, the glass panes of the clock's face radiated out from its center, framing both men and especially the long, pointing arm of the architect.
It's one of the few like it left in town.
Pickle Inspector said, having a hard time appreciating the art when he could be watching the mystery man smile.
Ain't that a shame?
The man said with feeling, stepping closer and keeping his voice low.
Makes a guy glad to see this one. What do you make of him?
Pickle Inspector looked at the two figures, and especially the round, robust man carrying the giant block.
It'd be something building that whole tower. I guess they must have been quite a team.
You think?
The man smiled at the thought, then squinted his own. He looked from the architect to Pickle Inspector and then followed his eyes to the worker. The man rubbed his back.
Now that I look at it and think, man, but that must kill his back.
Pickle Inspector let out a bubbling laugh and clapped his hands together. The sound echoed through the shelves and he looked mortified, glancing over his bony shoulders only to find they were still alone.
Oh,
The mystery man wagged a finger at him and smiled wickedly.
you're gonna get us in trouble.
Pickle Inspector put his hands up in surrender.
You got me.
Pops,
Tavros asked cautiously.
how was your date?
His father coughed suddenly and dryly into his fist, jarred by the question. Pickle Inspector felt himself flush, balling up his fists. He watched the man push his phone out of his pocket and pretend to check it.
He called and said he had to take a rain check.
He was a smooth liar, but Pickle Inspector didn't hold that against him. The man cocked his head lightly and sucked his teeth, overly fine with the situation.
Too bad.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Tavros hugged the book to his chest. He looked up at them both.
Maybe you two should get coffee instead.
Well, that is...
Neither of them could tell what the librarian was about to say, but they would both guess that steam was about to come out of his ears. The look of direct, uncertain anticipation on Hart's face kept him waffling.
It's very nice, but the thing is, sort of, I don't mean to butt in on your day.
Nonsense.
Hart smiled at him and the librarian's face brightened, even if he looked wound up tight enough to snap.
Yes, that little place out front. How about I buy you a coffee? Boy, helping Tavros out.
The librarian let out a happy-sounding sigh, his eyes twinkling and his hands wringing together. He started to nod and say something as Hart's phone rang loudly in his pocket.
Oh, is that him?
Tavros cocked his head as Hartz peered at his screen. The librarian was watching, looking pale and staring indelicately. A powerful "shush" cut through the air overhead and Hartz winced. He ducked his head, grimacing at the caller ID.
No, it's your uncle. Hang on, I better take this outside. I'll be back in a minute.
Hartz put up a finger and smiled briefly at them both before hurrying away. Tavros couldn't help feeling miffed as he led his new friend back to their table.
I bet it's work stuff. We're gonna have to go in a minute.
He picked up his backpack and put it over one shoulder, holding his book in the other hand.
It was really nice meeting you, mister. Sorry, what'd you say your name was?
Sorry, I didn't even introduce myself.
The librarian fumbled through 3 different overstuffed pockets before he pulled a business card out of his overcoat.
I'm Pickle Inspector. It's very nice to meet you, Tavros.
Tavros took the card, surprised that he wasn't a librarian, and a little concerned he trusted a complete stranger so implicitly. The card read, "Discombobulated? Need help parsing out another of life's many pickles? Look no further. Pickle Inspector, Private Investigator. 1-800-OGLE now. Offices of Teen Sleuth LLP, 5017 Franklin Street, 5017 Franklin Street, Suites 40 through 42.
Oh,
Tavros said, feeling the chances of the private eye and his father having coffee growing far, far less likely.
you're a rent-a-cop?
What?
Pickle Inspector looked baffled by that, his blue eyes bugging wide and white out of his face. He blinked a few times to collect himself, smiling bemusedly.
I suppose so. I've scarcely heard it called that.
Not by children, anyway. That was more of the hard boy vernacular. Before Pickle Inspector could soak that in any deeper, his own phone buzzed in his pocket.
Oh, drat.
He took it out and saw Ace Dick's number and knew whatever he was calling about it must be some kind of screwball mess. At 10 in the morning on a Saturday, Ace must have really stepped in something to involve Pickle Inspector.
I'm afraid I've got to go. You feel free to call if you need any more book recommendations, all right?
Yeah.
Tavros still seemed down about something, but he gave Pickle Inspector a smile nonetheless and waved as he walked through the lobby.
Bye, Mr. Inspector.
Pickle Inspector came out into the street to find a view of Tavros' father deep in a phone call with the boy's uncle. Coming down the front steps, Pickle Inspector had a view of the man's backside and that helped him ignore his own buzzing phone, even though he knew Ace would give him an earful if he didn't pick up. He flipped it open and answered, standing a ways behind Tavros' father, and not exactly listening to Ace's gruff greeting. The view in front of Pickle Inspector made it hard to think of anything except, well, all of that. Ogling couldn't be helped. He was so taken with the view that he almost missed what the man was saying as he spoke firmly and with growing agitation to Tavros' uncle.
Diamond, slow down. You need to breathe. No, I haven't seen him. Why would I lie? Are you that crazy? Come on, Drew, don't. No, you're not skinning anyone, do you hear me? Okay, look, I'll be there in a minute. Can you just keep it together until then? God damn, Diamonds, I don't know how Speed puts up with you. Alright, you don't have to yell, I'm sorry. The Bombay machine in his brain churned to a halt, the egg timer at the far end ringing bright and clear. Pickle Inspector knew in a rush that he was standing there ogling the ass of none other than Hearts Boxcars, leg breaker, and bassist of the nefarious Midnight Crew. All the color drained out of his face and careened down his body, landing hard on the pavement underneath his feet. The hand holding his phone shook and he hissed in a breath through his teeth, finally hearing a stick snapping at him.
Pickle! For Christ's sake, Pickle, are you there? We got a goddamn mess on our hands and we need you. Hello? Are you listening to me, you damned ostrich?
Yeah, Ace.
He said in a whisper, clutching the phone to his face and ducking his head as he hurried past Boxcars. He thought that he heard Boxcars start to break away from his phone call as he scuttled by, and so Pickle Inspector picked up the pace, jumping gangly into his car and throwing the phone into the passenger seat as he jammed the key in the ignition, yanked the emergency brake up, and peeled out of the library parking lot. He'd barely gotten the driver's side door closed by the time he was fishtailing out of the lot and into traffic. But he made it, no scary mobster snatching him up or nothing. Pickle Inspector raced to the nearest red light, a block down, then jerked the car to a halt and sucked in several long, deep breaths and picked up his phone.
Okay, Ace, I'm here. What's wrong?
Jesus Christ, Pickle, I thought you'd fallen down a manhole or something. Where did you go? I heard you flop into something and then tires squealing. Did you get kidnapped?
What? No, it's too much to explain. Just tell me what you were going to tell me.
Pickle Inspector eased his foot off the brake as the light turned, his 68 Beetle trundling through the street. He drove extra slow now that he was on the phone, but kept his eyes moving between the road and his rearview mirrors just in case a band of angry mobsters was going to come pouring out of the library parking lot after him.
I'm not telling you over the phone. Just get your ass over here. It's too much of a goddamn mess to say over the phone.
God, Ace, now is not the time to be cagey.
Pickle Inspector loved Ace Dick like a brother, an unhelpful, boorish brother.
Would you just tell me?
No can do, Pickle. Get to the office and me and Sleuth will show you. Come around back to the parking lot. We'll meet you there.
He hung up and Pickle Inspector was left to weave through late morning traffic with a growing, dreadful pit in his stomach.
Nice.
And I believe at the top the author mentioned the couple of songs that they referenced in this fic. If you want to listen to those.
Oh,
songs,
yeah. Nice.
Yeah, that was good. I would like to read more of this.
That was quite good.
Yeah.